technology, innovation, machine learning is replacing thousands and millions of jobs, and it's going to accelerate.
Farhad Massoudi, the entrepreneur. Farhad is the CEO of one of the hundreds of companies who have licensed WatchMojo's content over the years. When Farhad ventured into entrepreneurship, he launched a company called AdRise, which dabbled in the OTT, or over-the-top connected space. Eventually, he and his team pivoted AdRise and renamed it Tubi, seeing the growth in advertising video on demand, or AVOD, before others did. Earlier this year, in 2019, it was rumored that Viacom was acquiring Tubi before it settled for Pluto instead. We chatted about M&A, entrepreneurship, startups, as well as immigration and the opportunity that provides to individuals around the world. So, you're a Bay Area executive, technology entrepreneur, but nowadays you work with a lot of traditional media companies who I'm going to guess are not even New York based, but more LA, so even more traditional. What's that dynamic like?
It's a great question. Yes, I come from Bay Area tech category. I do spend a lot of time in LA and New York, both. I actually, in my board, I have quite a few folks from both traditional media and Silicon Valley. They don't think alike, which is fascinating. I think media companies are full of brilliant, creative people. And tech industry is very data-driven, scientist-type profiles. So it's the left brain, classical left brain, right brain type profiles, which is really interesting. And our company is at the intersection of tech and media, so it's my job to deal with both profiles. It's really fun.
So you started off, when we met, you were running AdRise, right? It was an OTT play, and then one day, the checks are the same company, but there's a new does business as Tubi. So we talk a lot about pivots. What was that moment when, as an entrepreneur, was it you, your gut? You're walking on the mountaintop and you get the vision. Did you have a advisor tap you on the shoulder? Did something happen in the marketplace? Take us through that transformation.
Well, let me take you back all the way to the beginning. It was 2005. I was a student at UC Berkeley. And at the time, CFO of Netflix was a guest lecturer in a business class. I was an engineering student, but I was taking a business class. And I remember the students were grilling him, funny enough, that their business is going to be in trouble. The more the consumers use their service, the more they have to pay for shipping and handling, because the DVD shipping business. And then he said something that stuck with me, which is TV apps will ultimately replace TV channels. Fast forward years later, and I was thinking about that. I was in ad tech, and I realized that, wait a second, if TV apps replace TV channels, TV ad industry is going to be completely disrupted, and that's a huge opportunity. That led me to launch AdRise, which was a technology platform company behind the scene powering the likes of Stars and Discovery Channel's video on demand apps. And 3 years into that business, I realized that consumers don't want 50 apps. They don't want a tiny Stars app and a tiny Discovery app and a tiny. They want one place to watch all their free content, and they want it personalized to their tastes. And that was the aha moment. That 3 year of education was incredible for us. I also learned about media. I didn't know much about media before that. And we built a lot of tech for video on demand, for content, and advertising, which we ended up using for Tubi. So it was more of an evolution than a pivot.
It wasn't a single moment. So right now, when you talk about video, lots of credit to what you've built and you and your team have built at Tubi, but really there's two giants, YouTube and Netflix, with very different visions of the world. Mm-hmm. But let's take a step back. You spent some time at Yahoo, and if you think of what they had with just the portal presence and reach, they bought Flickr, which had a component of media, images granted. With Delicious, they had tagging, which YouTube kind of initially popularized. Talk to me a little bit about innovator's dilemma, not to kind of shit on Yahoo here, but just generally speaking, what did you learn and see about organizations who fail to capitalize on these huge opportunities? What is it, the leadership? Is it the structure? Is it inertia?
It's a great question. I left Yahoo because I was frustrated. I was working at the time Yahoo Personals, which at the time was the second largest online dating site in the US after Match.com. And what we talked about was competitive analysis, and so has this feature. Let's build I'm not kidding, 12-month roadmap of analyzing the competitive landscape and B, launching a similar service. Similar things happen in other groups within Yahoo. Yahoo Maps was the great example, or Yahoo Mail, where Gmail and Google Maps came along, introduced a revolutionary change in their products, and Yahoo was just too slow to react. And bottom line, the company wasn't willing to take risk because they thought, and Yahoo was always that feeling, where they thought they stumbled upon this great business that's doing fine, and let's not shake it. And that mindset ultimately led to the demise of Yahoo, I think, plus the fact that they didn't focus on one thing and they were distracted.
Interesting. So recently, you don't have to dive into specifics, rumors had it that the fine folks at Viacom were pursuing an acquisition or strategic partnership with Tubi. Setting aside if that's just rumor or fact, we've always been in M&A talks ourselves. I'm very transparent. M&A is a means to an end, and the end is to grow. And it's you're either buying or selling or status quo. But what were some of the lessons, assuming that was real or similar discussions you had? What are some of the takeaways? Like I always come, with like I'm stronger out of every process, and there's things that I admit would do differently, or there's things that I learned. What are some like the 2 or 3 things that you came away from that experience, or such an experience?
Well, I can't comment on M&A activity, and so if I can't comment on it, I can't tell you if there are lessons to be learned. The way I think about M&A potential is that really I wake up every day, think about how do I build a great product that consumers love, and how do I build a great business. That's what I'm focused on, not the exit, and what the outcome happens when it happens. So hopefully we're in a position where we can choose the outcome, and I think today we are. So I'll leave it at that.
So one of the challenge I have is you studied engineering, I studied business. Like I love the humanities, I love psychology, sociology, I loved history and all that. But it was like everybody told me just go in business, you'll have more options. If you're not going to do medicine or engineering, the real challenging stuff. And we read books like Built to Last, and you study these great corporations that go on forever. You hear about entrepreneurs that run companies with like a 30-year time horizon. Mm-hmm. And then my challenge nowadays is I feel I truly respect entrepreneurs. There's a great camaraderie between entrepreneurs, but everybody I feel is a flipper mindset. Is that my bias, or do you feel like most entrepreneurs today are flippers, or are they really truly builders who want to build these iconic companies that stand? And in the context of raising capital from venture funds who have a 5-year time horizon to repay investors, is that even possible to be an entrepreneur these days that wants to build instead of flip?
Well, so I think there are a couple of themes there. I don't know what the average entrepreneur thinks. I think that there's nothing wrong with, there are entrepreneurs who start a restaurant and they're profitable businesses and they're happy, and that's great. When you raise capital from a venture capital firm, then they're expecting a significant multiple on the exit. So being profitable or growing slow is not an option. Now, I think to have the luxury of not flipping, so-called, and focusing on a long-term growth is something that not many people experience. I think that's an incredible feeling, an incredible place to be. But it's not necessarily right for every business, nor is it the only way to be quote-unquote successful.
Yeah, I mean, running a media content company, I feel like things that are sustainable are not necessarily scalable, and things that scale quickly are generally not sustainable. So as much as I've always, early on we couldn't raise capital for our life depended on it, and then once we experienced success, we could get a lot of interested parties, but I just ultimately felt that they wouldn't necessarily allow us to grow naturally. All of a sudden we start to be everything to everyone, to your earlier point about Yahoo. Okay, so you and I both originally come from Iran. So I was born there in 78. We left in 83. We had it relatively easy. Were you born there or here, or?
So I was born in Philly.
You were born in Philly?
I was born in Philly. My parents were going to school there. my dad was getting his second PhD. My mom was getting
Very Iranian. The
yes,
second PhD.
I'm the least educated member of my family. I only have a bachelor's degree. Literally, even my grandpa is a doctor. It's terrible.
You're the black sheep.
Yeah, I know, indeed. And so, anyways, I was born in Philly. Then the Iranian Revolution happened, and they canceled my parents' fellowship. They went back. My dad was a professor. My mom was a chemist. And so they went back to teach, and then they basically realized that the situation is different.
Understatement.
Yes. And so after regime change, so they couldn't leave the country. They lost their jobs. It was sort of quite a dire situation there. And as a result, I grew up in Iran until 2000, where I finished high school. I was first year in college. I came to US for a summer vacation, which never ended.
Nice. Okay, so now, you know, we have different, because I grew up here. I'm as Canadian or as American as they come. So I never even really lived in Iran as a young adult or whatever. But in America, you're hearing talk of socialism, and all of a sudden capitalism and proponents of capitalism have to defend themselves. We've seen what happens when there's like a state or a regime that's not ideal. It's replaced by something, and then it's not necessarily better. And people are like, ooh, the devil we knew was better than the devil we didn't. From your vantage point, what do you think about what's happening in the States now? This talk of socialism and you know, this kind of malaise amongst a wide percentage of the electorate that, at least in American history, are talking about things that we've never really heard in America going back a couple hundred years.
Look, I think I'm always against this black and white of whether this thesis or concept works for today's society or not. I feel incredibly lucky to be in America, you know, and this sort of capitalistic society where someone like me comes from Iran and has an opportunity to build a company. I don't think I could have done it anywhere else in the world. So from that perspective, this is a dream place for me to be, and I completely appreciate it. Having said that, having some social protection for people who are underprivileged, whether it's healthcare or education, I think is necessary. You guys have...
You're describing Canada,
exactly,
but sure, go
to
on.
some extent. That, and I think there are some issues with Canadian healthcare system and all that. Everybody highlights that. But nonetheless, I think that's necessary for us because it's just the right thing to do.
So
now, how you label it socialism or not, I think it's nuances.
Now, give me your thoughts on the role that entrepreneurship plays. You hear a lot about, you know, raising minimum wage, and then you hear about the government backing these opportunity zones. And the government has like an admirable track record in like building roads over a long period of time, or hospitals and whatnot. But when it comes to them necessarily being like an incubator or like a vehicle to spur innovation and entrepreneurship, less so. Do you feel that the path towards minimizing the disparity between the rich and the poor, is it more just like minimize the minimum wage, increase the minimum wage? Or is it, no, not everybody's an entrepreneur, but if everybody could be more entrepreneurial, then that might actually reduce the gap a bit more?
Yeah, this is something I've thought about a lot. Look, I live in San Francisco. It's a city where the income gap is just so visible every day in the streets. The tech industry is booming. There's a lot of wealth, and other communities have been left behind. And it's a problem that will, I think, spread first in the United States and then globally. So this is something we need to think about. Technology, innovation, machine learning is replacing thousands and millions of jobs, and it's going to accelerate. And you know, a lot of people argue that happened in the past too, but the issue is that this is happening at such a rapid pace. It's happening within a generation. So it's difficult. If you're a truck driver and you lose your job due to autonomous driving, what do you do? And the idea of learning how to code is not realistic for a lot of people. For some of them, of course, it is. So you know, I think there are issues with minimum wage solution, but we need as a society to come up and discuss that. And it's not, and I think some people label immigration as a problem. It is there are some issues introduced as a result of open immigration policies, but that's not the main cause. Technology, innovation, automation is the real culprit. And I don't think we need to slow down technology innovation. I think we need to think about solutions to help others catch up.
So you're the CEO of the company. Your ultimate job is like the chief cheerleader. You're recruiting talent every day. We saw recently that Uber, and this also happened at Vice and it also happened at BuzzFeed, all these companies that basically were promising these options as like a path to riches. So people, when they saw the lackluster Uber IPO results, they said it's going to change funding. And I think I would say it's not really going to change funding dramatically. Do you think that by virtue of people not making millions, not talking about the original investors or the founders, but like the majority of employees at Uber and Vice not making any money from the option, what impact is that going to have on recruiting, hiring, compensation of employees?
So on the case of Uber, I think we have to wait 6 months and see what happens. Obviously, all Uber employees have to wait this period. There are plenty of companies that have gone IPO and people have benefited. So I don't know if there is a pattern here. At least I don't see it yet. So I think most of the wealth of technology industry, at least, has come from the option pools.
Now, what do you think about, a year ago this time in 2018, it was like peak metoo, where it was everybody, if you had said something even remotely non-PC, you were just going to be kind of fed to the lions because it was like companies didn't want anything to do with you. Some will argue that overshot and there's a regression to the mean. But it does appear that there's been a lot of venture capitalists and especially executives with, suspect behavior who seem to be forgiven, and be taken back into organizations. What are your thoughts as someone who ultimately is the purveyor of a company's organization's culture and communication? Where do you draw the line between minimizing and eliminating bad behavior versus being fair, to give somebody the benefit of the doubt if you should, and then making sure that you don't both at the same time overshoot, but then you don't also just quickly forget and back to the old?
It's a great question. Look, let's not forget, there was some behavior that was completely unacceptable that happened that resulted in the Me Too movement. And there may have been examples of others who, didn't do extreme situations and maybe they were overshot. But I think it was important for us as a society to think about how do we treat women in the workplace or elsewhere. And I think that's super important, especially San Francisco, where I live, in the tech community, which has historically been male-dominated, and this is one of the big problems in the tech community. So, getting more women involved in a way that they feel safe is incredibly important. But I think we need to take every situation on its own and figure out what's the right thing to do.
A couple more questions. I know you have a panel to head to. So. You talk about San Francisco. It seems like originally that was a fertile area for startups and innovation, but also because it was like a low-cost place to go to. San Francisco is anything but low cost now. Just your expression says it all. Does that mean that like San Francisco and the Bay Area has become this paradox where it's actually maybe the worst place to start a company because it's so expensive? Meaning when a company is early on trying to figure out the business model, you can't really be burning that kind of money. So what does that mean long-term to its role in the landscape?
It's something that, funny enough, I've been chatting with some of our board members about it too. Yes, it is incredibly expensive. I mean, the cost of living, rent, we're about to move into a new office space and the costs are just crazy, and salaries are more expensive because employees have a higher cost to live in San Francisco. Having said that, the talent pool in San Francisco is second to none. There are brilliant people everywhere in the world, no question, but the density in San Francisco is much higher for the type of talent that's needed to build a tech company in San Francisco. So it's just, there are pros and cons to both. I'm sure you can build an incredible company next to U of T in Toronto, and there are a lot of smart people there. It's just the number of engineers and tech people that you can find in San Francisco is much higher than anywhere else in the world.
Final question. What's the number one thing that you know now that you've learned that you wish you knew either when you started your career in industry or mainly when you started AdRise Tubi?
This has been a theme of, for me as an entrepreneur who knows and understands that there are many things about myself that I need to learn and grow. So understanding that, I'm not where I need to be, but every day I'm getting better. Every day I'm better than yesterday. I think that humility and also urgency to learn, combination is critical.